Good morning, everyone. My name is Rabbi Nate DeGroot. I am the Associate Director, Spiritual and Program Director with Chazon Detroit, the Metro Detroit region of Chazon.
Hi, I am S.J. Selden. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a co-founder and board chair of Jewish Farmer Network and a co-founder and steward and farmer at Yesod Farm and Kitchen, which is a Jewish community farm on ancestral Cherokee and Catawba land near Asheville, North Carolina. And we're so glad to be here with you. So welcome to this session on Shemitah. I'm going to provide a little bit of a framing of what we're about to step into. Nate's going to give us a roadmap of where we're going to go from there, and we're going to dive in together. So what is Shemitah? Why are we here? What's going on? Shemitah, I think about this as like our paradigm, our Jewish paradigm for how we interact with time and space. That just as Shabbat grounds us in a weekly reminder of rest, the necessity of rest, one day of every 7, we humans get to rest. Shemitah is the same thing for the land. Shemitah is Shabbat ha'aretz, Shabbat of the land. And it is this acknowledgement that just as we need rest, just as our animals and our laborers need rest, the land itself requires rest to be in right relationship with itself and for us to be in right relationship with it. And Shemitah is nested in the cycle of 7s, which begins with Shabbat, goes to Shemitah, and then goes from there to Yovel. So 7 cycles of Shemitah, 49 years, brings us to Yovel, this like grand Shabbat, this grand Shemitah. It is Shabbat for Hashem. It is Shabbat for God, for the divine. And that is a year of tremendous remission where debts are forgiven, land itself is set free, and people are free to return in our ideal forms to their ancestral homelands. So to understand Shemitah, we understand that this is one piece of technology that is part of a larger system of how we as Jews orient ourselves in time and space and orient our relationship to cycles of sacred rest and sacred labor. So that is like our beginning. I would love us to take a breath together to kind of breathe in to like the beautiful imaginary space we are entering into, of really sinking into what is the technology of our ancestors and how do we bring that technology into this moment today to find meaning and to find right relationship with our people, the land that we are on, and ourselves and our humans around us in community. So thank you for joining with us. Please, throughout the session, feel free to throw questions into the chat. And I'm going to hand it back to Nate to give us some origins and where we're headed from here.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, SJ. So maybe as I'm about to launch into this, I'm curious if people feel comfortable to put into the chat on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being like, this is the first time I've ever heard of Shemitah. I really know nothing about it, to 5 being like, I studied this, that last Shemitah cycle. I was all over it, practicing all of the precepts from front to back. So if you're comfortable, just to kind of gauge who's in the room and what our collective Shemitah knowledge is, 1 being first time I've ever really heard of it, don't know really anything at all, 5, like, yeah, this is my jam. All right, so we can just kind of see these coming in as we go. So, I'm curious whether this is a representative sample of the Jewish community or whether this is a self-selecting group that was excited to talk about Shemitah. I see definitely a range. So you can keep those coming in and we as a group can kind of see where we're at. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen. Great, yeah, okay, fantastic. I'm going to share my screen so that we can go over some of the origin text, really the texts that build Shemitah from the ground up in Torah, the first text that we see describing Shemitah. And we will be spending the majority of this session really thinking about how Shemitah might apply to our lives today, to the lives of our communities, to the world at large. But before kind of launching into that, we wanted to make sure that everyone was playing on a kind of level playing field and that we were rooting ourselves in the tradition itself. So I'm wondering if there's a volunteer who might be willing to read source number 1. This comes from Exodus 23:10 through 12. English is fantastic. We have the Hebrew here for you as well, if that is helpful. If someone would be willing to unmute themselves and begin with 6 years you shall sow.
And the document I just shared in the chat is our notes document where you can click and follow along as well. Nate, if it's possible to make your screen bigger, there was a request so that it's a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, if someone could unmute and launch us with Shemot 23:10 through 12, that would be great.
6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its field, but in the 7th year ye shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave, let the wild beasts eat of it. You shall do the same with your vineyards and olive groves. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Please scroll. In order that your ox and your ass may have rest, and that your bondsman and the stranger may be refreshed.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So as we're reading through these, just take note of what you're reading, what you're seeing. Do these kind of start to fall into some categories, which we'll spell out a little bit later? What are we noticing about the land, the time frame? We're in that 7-year cycle that SJ spoke about earlier. So we're going to keep going. And would love a volunteer to read this source from Vayikra, from Leviticus 25, 1 through 7. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke.
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moshe in Har Sinai, saying, Speak to Yisrael's children and say unto them, For you will come to the land which I give you, and the land will rest. Should I say Adonai
Sure.
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Shabbat. 6 years will you sow your field, and 6 years you will prune your vineyard and gather in the produce. And in the 7th year, it will be the Sabbath, Shabbat, Shabbaton for the land, a Sabbath for Yahweh. Don't sow your field and don't prune your vineyard. You will not gather in what grows by itself of your harvest, or gather the grapes of your unpruned vines. It will be a year of complete rest for the land. Shanat Shabbaton la'aretz, and the Shabbat of the land will be for you eating, for you and for your male servant, and for your female servant, and for your hired worker, and for your settler living as a stranger with, and for your beast, and for the animal which is in your land. All of her produce will be to eat.
Thank you so much. So we continue to notice, what does this say about the land? What does this say about growing? What does this say about our food? What does this say about our relationships? We start to track that as we read the final text that we're going to read together in English. If I can have a third volunteer, and I will scroll as we get closer to the bottom so we can see. At the end of every 7 years.
At the end of every 7 years, you will make a release, a Shemitah. This is the nature of the release. Every creditor will release what he loaned his neighbor. He will not demand of his fellow or his brother, because it is a release that is proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may demand it, but you must release whatever is yours with your brother. Take care, lest there be a useless thought within your heart saying, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye becomes evil with regard to your needy brother, and you don't give to him. Then he will cry out, and it will sin. You will surely give him, and your heart will not turn evil when you give to him. For it is for this reason that Adonai your God will bless you in all your work and in all that your hand acquires. He will never cease being in the midst of your land, which is why I command you, saying, you will hand, opening to your brother, to your poor, and to your needy in your land. If your brother is sold to you, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, then he can serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year, you will make him go out free. When you set him free, do not let him go empty-handed. Furnish him out of the flock, threshing floor, and vat, with which the Lord your God has blessed you. Bear in mind that, you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and our Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I enjoin this commandment upon you today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other. And the texts are also available by Google Doc in the chat, which SJ put in there, so that you can see them. There as well. I want to kind of get a sense of what people noticed. Any phrases that stand out, any categories that stand out, any thoughts that you saw. Please feel free to type them into the chat. Just kind of get a word map of sorts in the chat, or if someone wants to unmute themselves and share a little bit as well, kind of what you saw.
I would say what you saw, or also any questions that come up. If you're like, how would this work? Like, put that in the chat. Like, if you're like, what do we eat in the 7th year? Put that in the chat.
Wild beasts eating the food left over and working animals being given a rest year. So what are we eating? The food that's left over, and that our animals get a rest. Releasing from burden seems to permeate all three texts. That we become equal with each other, with the land and with all that live among us. Beautiful. We were slaves, God redeemed us, so we have to redeem other humans and the land. Okay, so connecting the commandment of Shemitah and that release and maybe that equalizing to our own release from Egypt. Beautiful. Releasing debts. Okay, so now an economic element to this. But we still owe our debt of rest to the land. Okay, so we release other people of debt, but we actually still have a debt to the land itself. How do we apply this concept to a world that is so far removed from the cycles of the field? Beautiful. Yeah, some of us are very removed from that, some of us less so. Okay, SJ, you want to take that one?
And then from Sam, the first section saying that we can also not harvest from our perennials. So this question of what are we eating? Are we eating what is preserved? From Elise, I'm struck by the idea of taking care to watch our heart and eyes so they remain open to others and not be greedy. Gail, an interplay between protecting the land and the inhabitants. And then Olivia, great question. Does everyone do a Shemitah year on the same year? And then it always amazes me that the first year in the land was a Shemitah. So I think this is actually a great segue for us to talk about, to touch on some contemporary practices. So when we think about, this source text, it's important to remember that this text is talking about a very specific time and place. This text is talking about what is going to happen in the land of Israel, at a moment thousands of years from this point. And to bring ourselves into the understanding that, we as a people who've been primarily a diasporized and a diaspora people for the last 2,000 years, are in a constant act of interpretation of saying, how do we carry our tradition with us? How do we take these things that many of which are only supposed to apply over there and make them relevant here? What does it mean to, for example, a modern Jewish farmer in North Carolina or in Ontario or in Florida to be honoring our traditions, ethics and modes and sacred calendar of Shemitah in this time and place? Speaking personally, I'm stewarding land that is in Western North Carolina. And our first year on this land, we did not interact with the soil in any kind of interfering way. We didn't grow annual crops. Some people might say, oh, like you did a permaculture year of observation. Permaculture is a system which is in many ways an amalgamation of ancestral indigenous knowledge and Aboriginal knowledge that was then like packaged and sold by 2 white Australian men. So when we think about what it means to be Jewish land stewards specifically, we actually can ground ourselves in our own concepts of land right relationship and say, okay, you arrive on a piece of land. What you're doing, if you want to take a year to really just be in presence, is you're having a year in the vein of Shemitah. You're having a year of observation and of seeking to be in relationship with a place that is not about taking, and that is not about producing, but it is about like being in a place of rest and relationship building. So that's what we did here on this land. And I think as we keep going, what we're going to be wrestling with throughout the session is how do we take a system that in many ways you could say was not intended for this time or this place, and see what jewels we can bring forth as we interpret our way into living into this tradition, where and how and when we are. Nate, anything to add?
Yeah, well, so maybe I'll move us on to the next section, which is when we were going through these texts, what really stood out to us was kind of 3 main buckets, 3 main categories that we felt like what we read of these origin texts fell into and fall into. And so we want to give you that kind of structural framework, and then we'll give you some prompts and kind of let you know what comes next. So what we felt like is the first main bucket that these texts fall into and these practices fall into is having to do with the relationship to land, right? Relationship to land, to growing, to food, to the harvests, and all of that. So land as the first bucket. The second big bucket that we saw was relationship to economy. We talked about debts and we talked about finances and how that's working. And then the third one is a relationship to liberation. We saw that slaves are released at the end of 6 years of service. So the three main paradigms, the three main buckets that we saw, again, land, economy, and liberation. So what we're going to do in the remaining time of this session is we're going to encourage you all to think about how Shemitah might pertain to you as an individual, how it might pertain to any organization that you are a part of or representing, how your organization might actually implement some of these practices, and then what it would look like if elements of Shemitah were practiced on a societal level. The way that we are going to do that is in just a moment, SJ is going to give you a journaling prompt to take a few minutes on your own to think about your individual relationship to Shemitah and how your life might change based on practices of Shemitah. Then we're going to get into breakout groups based on one of those three buckets. So whatever you're most interested in between relationship to land, relationship to economy, and relationship to liberation. And as a group of, an affinity group, if you will, of folks who are all interested in that same topic, you'll get a chance to kind of think about how that could apply to your organization. And then we'll have some sharebacks and then come back together for some dreaming about what this could look like on a societal wide level. So SJ is going to give you that prompt in just a moment, but before that happens, I want to, or right through the text, I just want to ask for you to please rename yourself. So hopefully you know how to do that. There's 3 dots in the top right corner of your box where you see your own face. If you click on that, there's an option to rename yourself. If that feels difficult or you're not really sure how to do that, maybe put in the chat what I'm about to say. If you want to be in a breakout group discussing relationship to land, please put the number 1 in front of your name. If you want to be in a breakout group discussing your relationship to economy, please put 2 in front of your name. And if you want to discuss relationship to liberation, put 3 in front of your name. So kind of decide which topic you want to discuss, what you're most interested in or surprised by. Rename yourself so that you're putting one of those numbers in front of your name, and that will help our tech wizard, Abby, help break you out into groups based on that interest. SJ, you want to take it away?
Great. So take a minute to give yourself to rename yourself. And once you've renamed yourself, I'm going to repost in the chat this journaling prompt. So this is just to kind of get us all into a mindset of the individual, knowing that like anything that we do as individuals is going to ripple out into every system that we are a part of. So what is one way that your life might change during your guided by the law of Shemitah? Some spheres to consider are your relationships to food, land, finances, debt, labor, prisons, and liberation. So take a couple of minutes, maybe take some notes after changing your, thank you for everyone who's already changed your name. We'll bring you back in a couple of minutes to go into breakout groups.
Beautiful. I'm also putting into the chat again a doc with the origin text. So if you want to reference those again as you're thinking about how your life would change.
Finish your last sentence, whether it's in your mind or something that you're writing physically. And as we're coming back from this prompt, just post into the chat a word about how it felt to think about the way Shemitah could change your life as an individual. Liberating and daunting, accountable, slower, limitless, beautiful, confusing, 100%, provoking, minimalizing. So with that grounding in the individual, thank you for everyone who's shared. We're going to move into breakout groups. I see that as so far only one person, if I'm correct, has chosen breakout group number 2, economy. If anyone is interested or willing in scooching over to economy so that we can have a chavruta and have a group learning, please post that in the chat, and that way we can make sure everyone has a buddy.
So a real juicy one. You got release of student loans,
Joanna, is that you?
medical debt, credit card debt.
Great, thank you. Joanna and Michael B have both said they can go to 2. Amazing, thank you for joining, Andrew. Cool, so we are gonna move into breakout groups. Thank you so much to our tech support from Abby for doing that. The document that we shared earlier with the session, with the source text, if you scroll down to page 3, there's an overview of all the breakout group questions. And if you keep scrolling, you should find a notes section for your breakout group. Please take notes directly into this document. You should have edit access. And as you are taking notes, what we're asking you to do is to, using the questions below each section as a guide, consider all 7 years of the Shemitah cycle. So in order to not eat in the 7th year or to do a remission in the 7th year, you have to be doing planning and other activities in the other 6 years. So as you're thinking through these questions, think about what a time-space world of Shemitah would look like, not just in the 7th year, but in all years surrounding and holding that Shemitah year in place.
And just a reminder that this is specifically about how an organization, I think a Jewish organization in this context, and an organization that you're actually a part of, how could you as a member of that organization, how could your organization begin to implement Shemitah practices in a way that would be exciting and maybe necessary. As we go into the breakout groups, as SJ mentioned, please do take collaborative notes on the Google Doc. We are not going to have one person kind of share back from your group, but rather when we come back, we'll have a few minutes for anyone who's feeling called to share back some of the things that you came up with of how your organization could participate in this. But what's beautiful about this Google Doc is then we will have the notes from everyone that we all will have access to moving forward. So we are going to take 8 minutes in our breakout group, and you'll get a 2-minute warning and a 1-minute warning. So 8 minutes to talk with your fellow travelers on this topic, and we'll come back at 10:38.
I'll raise that I was in the land group, and I'll raise that our group came up with something that I think is very true, which is that growing food is really hard, and being in relationship with land and with our food system is really challenging. And what are the implications of that in a world when that is a truth? And also I want to lift up a question that came up in our group, which is, does this apply outside of the land of Israel if all of our texts are speaking specifically about the land of Israel? And I understand that there's like a great rabbinic debate that Ray does about this, but I don't know, Nate or SJ, if you have anything you can share on that.
I can. I have a dog barking in the background, but I will. I'll try to share one perspective, which you can actually find on the Chazon blog from a number of years ago, an article by Rabbi Eben Leder and now Rabbi Margie Klein, who talk about sacredness and kind of 2 models of sacredness. And if I need to stop, if this is too bad, I can. Is it? 2 models of sacredness. One that says that sacredness is born of separateness, and in order to be sacred, it has to be separate. And so in that model, Shemitah would only be related to the land of Israel. And another model that says that sacredness is about separateness in so much as we are able to then spread that sacredness outwards. That the reason that we have separateness is a kind of practice ground for how to spread how to spread sacredness to all corners of the world or all corners of time. So yes, there is definitely a debate on this with multiple sides. I would love to kind of take a minute for each topic. Hannah kind of began land for us, but if folks want to, anyone who discussed land, either put in the chat or unmute yourself and share a little bit about what really stood out to you. Sorry, Andrew. What really stood out to you about the conversation from land? What are you thinking about actually trying to implement in your organization? A minute or so for land.
I think that there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of different ways to come across with the land. whether it's going to be like hydroponics or just doing old school pots or actually planting in the ground. We found that some stuff, no matter how well tended, just doesn't make it. And other stuff that's just kind of like sprinkled and let's see what happens seems to be the stuff that grows the best. So yeah, it's a lot of trial, error, love, and patience.
Great, thank you so much. Anyone else from the land want to share before we move on to economy?
Well, I guess like I put in the chat, but the second question was how do you source your food? And I know I talked with Rabbi Nate about this many times since we're both in Detroit, but there's a lot of we keep kosher as a Hillel, and we don't have we have a kitchen, but we don't have kitchen staff, so we're always catering events. And when we cater events, it's up to the caterer where they source their food from. And we have this issue that we want to use more sustainable food. We are a seal site, but it doesn't always allow, like the caterers aren't seal sites yet. I think Rabbi Nate's working on that, but it's really hard to practice what you preach if you can't get the food that you want to use.
Thank you, Olivia. I appreciate that contribution. Moving on to economy, feedback from that group. What did you discuss? What possibilities feel exciting or scary? What feels practical? Anyone from two? Andrew?
I'll jump on in. So I don't mean to keep talking. I was mouthing someone else go, but I'll go. So we had a really nice conversation. We could have used more time. But it started with the notion of organizational debts. Is there a way to look forward? How might Shemitah impact the organizational debt, membership, direction of organizational cost? Can we look forward to the next cycle to manage donations, pledges, and finances? Right? Do we spend less this year and invest into the future? In a Shemitah year, would it be a good time for us to help expand people's understanding by educating them on what finances are and what the program costs are? And that question that just we came back to, much like Joseph's dream of the 7 cows, are there ways to save now to invest for later in terms of what we're doing with the land and what we're doing with our dollars?
Beautiful. Thank you, Andrew. Moving on to liberation. We have just a few moments, so now is your moment to jump in. Thanks, Sam.
Oh, Sam.
Not enough time to talk about it, but I think we started to really get into, in order to move forward and in order to find liberation, looking back and seeing, the harm that has been caused, as people in diaspora living on stolen land and land that's been developed by people stolen from their own land, right? Like, how do we move forward towards liberation, and just, I myself think about like returning land and reparations. So that came up a little bit in our discussion.
All right, so I know we want more time. Thankfully, this comes around every 7 years, and there are 6 years in between every Shemitah cycle. What we want to do now is we want to invite you to really consider what it would feel like to live in a world, or at least a country, that was oriented around Shemitah and the Yovel cycle. What would be different about your life, the lives of your loved ones, and community? This is huge, and it really is a dream moment. If you feel better closing your eyes, great. I'm going to put the prompt in the chat. Just take about 30 seconds, close your eyes, maybe find yourself comfortable in your chair, maybe feet on the ground, in a deep breath, and take a moment and really try to place yourself in a world in which Shemitah was active. What does that feel like? What does it look like, taste like, smell like? Take a few moments. And with apologies for pulling you from that world, that really beautiful liberatory world. As you come back, maybe put some words or phrases or images that came up for you in the chat. We are going to transition into the close, which will be a little bit of practicality and a little bit of blessing. So I'll just say briefly on my end, as a representative of Chazon, and yeah, these words are starting to pour in, which is really fantastic. Chazon is doing a lot of work around Shemitah. We're very passionate about Shemitah and really want to be working with you, our seal sites, Chazon seal sites, and more broadly, the Jewish community at large, to really think about how you might be taking on Shemitah as an organization, as individuals, how we might be taking on Shemitah as a Jewish community and really providing some cultural shift. So I'm going to put in the chat a link to Chazon's Shemitah resources. And this is something you can take a look at whenever you get the opportunity. And the invitation is there to be in touch with us, to reach out to your Chazon Seal representatives at Chazon and really talk through how you might incorporate Shemitah into the life of your organization and into the Jewish community. And if this is something you're passionate about, join us as we really consider what this upcoming Shemitah cycle will look like a year from now, and then beyond that as well.
And if you are a farmer or a farm adjacent, Jewish Farmer Network is running through our Friends that Generate Change a series of seed pods where we're convening communities of practice to talk about big topics related to Jewish farming. So if you want to be in a conversation about Shemitah as a Jewish farmer or a farm adjacent person, you can sign on to our go to our website. I just posted the link in the chat, jewishfarmernetwork.org/seedpods. And join that conversation from that lens of stewardship of land. So it's 10:50. I know we're like pushing the buzzer here. This is not enough time. It's not enough time to dream of liberation in 50 minutes. Not possible, but we have like the taste in our mouth of Olam Haba, like the world to come, of what is possible when we dream about a world that is liberated and land that can be liberated and free. In our last breaths together, I would love for anyone who feels called to offer a blessing for a world of Shemitah, a blessing for what it would mean for us to be a blessing to each other and to be a blessing to the land. So if you have a blessing, feel free to start whatever way it moves you, but may we all is a place to start. Feel free to unmute yourself and offer a blessing or put one in the chat for ourselves living in a Shemitah world.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Let me try to remember this. Shenatan lanu hizdamnut letaken et haolam. He's given us an opportunity to repair the world. And I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Amen. Thank you, Myrtle.
Amen.
Beautiful. Anybody else to close us out? In that case, if anyone else wants to join, now is your moment. If not, I will offer a blessing and invite Nate to do the same.
I love the feeling of the hug that we're experiencing right now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you for that blessing. May we know that another world is possible. May we breathe into a world of liberation for ourselves, all communities, and the land. May we be a blessing in every footstep to the lands in which we walk.
Amen. And then reflecting back, your own words from the chat. May we feel the relief of unification. May we feel the unifying relief. May we know the warmth and the hominess and the nourishment of the hearth and all that comes from it. May we feel gratitude for breath, for nature, and for heart. May we know relief and gratitude, relief and calm. May we head into a world in which community leads us into supporting each other, assisting those in need, and bringing rest and love from the land to the sky. May we take steps towards liberation, 7 years, 7 days, 7 minutes, 7 seconds at a time, where no one owns the land, no one is a servant or slave, where we are always healing the land and putting back what we have taken Thank you all so much for being part of this session, and may we know that world soon.
Amen. Thank you, Nate. Thank you to each of you for joining us. Hope you have a beautiful day and a Chag Sukkot Sameach, a very happy Sukkot holiday.
Thank you. Yesher koach.
Thank you.
Feel free to unmute and say goodbye as you leave. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the session.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.